I want to throw in my second son. His aspiration when he was 11 or 12 years old was to be arrested for violating the laws of physics.
It's
Right?
fantastic.
And he just he just thought it was funny that these were called laws. Like what legislative body enacted these laws and then imposed on our
Well, it
universe?
just taunts you. I mean, if you're a physicist or a philosopher, it just taunts you to find out how to break them, which
Yeah,
maybe is
yeah,
their whole purpose, right? It's just like,
yeah, right,
clearly
right.
I'm going to break this.
Can you plead not guilty for reason of insanity for breaking
Yeah,
the
right.
laws of physics? Right. Right.
Or having a better perspective. So many physicists I
Yeah.
talk to and engineers, and like you and I, we both do this thing where we sort of sometimes know the answer intuitively, but we're drawing from the future. We feel that we're drawing from the future. That's the only way we can explain it because we can't tell a good story about how we could arrive at a conclusion. Like the fact that you became sort of the godfather of AI, AGI, like that clearly feels to me like you were drawing from the future, but that's just because I think about time that way.
Yeah. I mean, when you accept resonance across time and space gaps, then you start to think about many things differently. And of course, we all know most cultures in human history have instinctively thought about things that way, from Chinese and Indian culture to indigenous Australian culture to the Amazonian culture that McKenna explored and so forth. Then what's interesting is how denying this resonance across time and space and adopting this clearly in many ways bogus materialistic view where time goes only in one direction and causation is restricted to our immediate physical surround. It's fascinating this turned out to be such a productive perspective, right? I mean, this let us build
Yeah.
computers, let us build the internet, let us go to the moon, which is incredible, right? So there's something to be gained by adopting that limitation, and it seems like a special case of the general idea in creative art that adopting a limitation drives
Creates,
creativity, right? Like
yeah,
if you're
right. More
like
creativity that way.
the musical scale is a terrible limitation. You got these 12 notes instead of the continuous spectrum of sounds. But once you adopt that limitation of the 12 notes, I mean, then you get harmony, you get music theory, you get a lot of beautiful stuff. Now, it doesn't have a fundamental meaning. Like you can invent a lot of other music that doesn't adhere to these arbitrary, semi-arbitrary 12 tones. They're not wholly arbitrary, right? I mean, you can make a 14 or 18 note scale. You can make music that's not scalar and just has continuous flowing. But adopting this constraint does lead to a bunch of beautiful structures that you can then build within. And the error then comes when you assume that constraint is a constraint on all of reality rather than just something that you adopt in order to be able to build things within certain limitations, right? So it seems
Yep.
like within the limitations of our minds, which are real, even though they're not what materialism thinks they are. I mean, within the limitations of our minds, conditional as these limitations may be, making the assumptions of materialism seems to let our minds play creatively in incredible ways that didn't arise to any culture that didn't make the false assumptions of materialism, right? So then,
And interestingly, though, now it has brought us to there's non-materialist perspective or post-materialist perspective, which I think is right on time.
yeah, and also in a way has to seem inevitable looking back, right? Like it didn't seem inevitable to Laplace or something, right? It might have seemed inevitable to Newton, who was an alchemist, that the two sides would eventually come together, even though he didn't see how to do it at that point. So then, this is an interesting thing about post-singularity superminds, be they upgraded humans or non-human AGIs or whatever. Like when a mind is a bit wider and doesn't have the same constraints that human minds have, it should be able to get the kind of generative creativity that we've gotten from the false assumption of materialism. It should be able to get that kind of creativity without making that kind of assumption, but from a more holistic assumption basis. This, you see this already in quantum computing. Like, we're
Yep.
just too dumb in some ways to come up with a great variety of quantum computing algorithms. But if
Yep.
like if you had a brain that could think quantum in a way that the human brain just finds it hard to do, because we evolved for a certain macroscopic world, right? If you had a brain that could think quantum in a deeper sense than we do, in a broader sense than we do, I mean, it could design all manner of quantum computing algorithms that we can't think of. I mean that's just one little
Well,
example.
and maybe it's also true that maybe it's a general truth that minds, regardless of the mechanisms underlying them, can use constraints effectively. So AGI will have its own constraints. And
It's
maybe those are very effective in creating a different kind of creativity.